Hi, I'm Josh Dick.
And I'm Sam Fritchell. Welcome to Star Wars Deep Digging, Season 1, Episode 3, Part 1.
We're still continuing with Princess the Scoundrel and the Farm Boy, so let's just get back to that. If you've seen the other two episodes, you know exactly what's going on, and if you haven't, please go watch them now. Here's just a little reminder of where we are at this point in the story. Luke and Ben made their way into the cramped cockpit where Han was continuing his calculations. Great, now we got an audience. Stay sharp, he warned Chewie. Looks like we have 2 more Imperial ships coming in. They're going to try and cut us off before we can make the jump to hyperspace. His co-pilot shot him an irritated look, clearly already 2 steps ahead of him. What could he say? One Imperial Star Destroyer was about 50 times the size of the Falcon, and that was enough to make him a little nervous. You know, I wish I knew the Star Destroyer sizes off the top of my head so I could check that. 3 made him downright jumpy. Luke leaned forward for a better look. Why don't you all run them? I thought you said this thing was fast.
There's only 2 types of Star Destroyer sizes, big and bigger.
Indeed. What was that, the 4th time the kid had insulted his baby? Watch your mouth, kid, or you're going to find yourself floating home.
Now I'm imagining Luke Skywalker floating home in space.
You wouldn't survive a few minutes. We'll be safe enough once we make the jump to hyperspace. Besides, I know a few maneuvers. More to himself than the others, he promised. We'll lose them. The Millennium Falcon bucked wildly at the first hits from the Imperial cruisers. White-blue sparks flashed outside the viewport, but the shields held. Here's where the fun begins, he told the others. Adrenaline pumped through him, filling his chest like a balloon.
This is where the fun begins.
How long before you can make... Nice Revenge of the Sith reference. How long before you can make the jump to lightspeed? The old man was the calm eye at the center of a storm. His pale blue eyes watched the sea of stars in front of him. He didn't seem particularly bothered, even as the ship shuddered and rocked around them, like it was on the verge of exploding. It'll take a few moments to get the coordinates from the navicomputer. Are you kidding? Luke cried. At the rate they're gaining? Good thing he didn't finish that thought. Han glared at him. This kid, honestly. Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy, he said. Without precise calculations, we could fly through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and then it'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?
Or a sun, or a black hole.
Or an interdiction field, or anything, really. The fire from the Star Destroyers came fast and hot now that Chewie could no longer avoid the bulk of it. Han braced a hand against the side paneling of the cockpit and input the last of the new coordinates. A red light flashed overhead, beeping out warning after warning after warning. Han winced. What does that flashing mean? Luke asked. We're losing our deflector shield. Go strap yourself in. I'm going to make the jump to lightspeed. And not a second too soon. Han met Chewie's light eyes. Punch it. The stars brightened around them, flaring to life in the second before the ship picked up speed. He was pushed back against his seat as...
I'm just thinking of this. Punch it, Chewie. Chewie punches 3PO. Not him, the Falcon.
Nice. He was pushed back against his seat as the Falcon flew forward into hyperspace, leaving the Imperial cruisers to eat its dust. Han let out an exhilarated laugh. Okay, so maybe that was the best part of flying. Chapter 9. That's it, exactly. The Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's the energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. So, okay, here's one of the flaws of this book's main gimmick. Because we don't get a Luke's POV until the last third, we gotta find a way to, well, the author, she's gotta find a way to recap all that stuff. And so, Obi-Wan is just repeating what he said earlier to Luke, except now Han's in earshot because we're focusing on him right now. Han's fingers slowed from where he was patching some of the Falcon's fried wiring. The old ship had taken a battering during their narrow escape from the Star Destroyers, and he had been kept busy seeing to fix it. Meanwhile, the old man had been lecturing Luke from the moment the ship had settled into hyperspace. They, Chewie, and the droids had migrated from the cockpit to the central hold area. Han told himself he was only hanging around nearby to make sure they didn't get any ideas about throwing their lightsabers around. He lifted his protective mask and cut the welding gun to match their reflections in a nearby panel. The old man was still trying to teach the kid to hold his sword and had moved on to posing Luke like a toy doll. Ben adjusted the kid's stance, pushing his legs out farther and having him raise his arms just so. Han wasn't convinced one needed perfect technique when wanted a sword that could cut through just about anything. Han, you need perfect technique to avoid cutting yourself.
I think a super battle droid made that mistake when taking Obi-Wan's lightsaber in a deleted scene for Revenge of the Sith.
I'll have to check that out.
Actually, it was more like a deleted scene referenced in a book, not an actual deleted scene.
Huh. Like this, Luke, Ben said, slinging his own lightsaber hilt down, then back up, then back down. He was grateful Ben wasn't working with his blade ignited like the kid was, otherwise the ship would be in pieces. Block, strike, block. Yes, precisely. Do you feel the force moving through you? It guides your body and obeys your command in equal measures. Yeah, Luke said. Yeah, I think I feel something. Hacking at the air for a half hour was going to give you sore arms, but that was about it. Wonderful. Ben shifted, sliding his foot back, raising his lightsaber hilt again and tilting his wrist back. Strike position. Relax your grip slightly. This leaves your chest open to attack, so you must hold this position for no more than a moment. Luke arched his back, and the pose was so strange Han couldn't help but chuckle in. The kid must have heard it because he scowled and switched the lightsaber off. This is pointless. What can I really learn on a ship in a few hours? Exactly. Han dropped his mask back down over his face and returned to the circuitry in front of him. I do not expect you to master everything in mere minutes, and you should not expect it of yourself either. That is a path to frustration, anger, and both are dangerous. As he switched the welder off again, Han heard Luke ask, What do you mean? There are two sides of the Force, Ben continued. The light side of the Force, the way of the Jedi, aligns with selflessness, enlightenment, mercy, and compassion. The dark side, the way of the Sith, deals in hatred, fear, anger, jealousy. See, you must learn to control your emotions, otherwise they will control you. Ha, Han thought. Easier said than done. Wasn't the mix of all that what made them humans? An excellent point, Han, and one that would be greatly explored in later works of fiction. Or I suppose earlier, depending on how you look at this. Why do some go to the dark side? He heard Luke ask. If they know that it brings destruction and pain, what's the draw? Everyone has their own destinies, the old man says. The Force works in mysterious ways, but it leads us to where we need to be in order to achieve balance. Many Sith believe that the dark side holds more power, but that is simply not true. Han strained his ears to catch what the old man said next. It was the Force that brought me into your life, and it is the Force that will guide you to your destiny. It was a comforting thought, even Han had to admit, the idea that everything happened for a reason. But the part about not being in the pilot seat of his own life rubbed at him in a bad way, and he knew firsthand that good and evil were not as cut and dry as the old loon was making them sound. Most people, himself included, had to live in that narrow, fuzzy bit of gray in between, because what ensured a long life tended to be good aim with a blaster, a fast ship, and dependable friends, not hoping some big energy field had your back. Everyone was just living and trying to get by in bad situations. Why should Han be any different? He sat up a little straighter, shaking his head. From an early age, he had learned always to rely on himself to decide his future, and nothing was going to change that now. All these causes people got behind, the Force, even the new Rebel Alliance, they only led straight to tragedy. Han had seen enough of life to know that, too. Okay, I can't think of a specific moment Han might be referring to. Moving on. The kid continued to slide between stances, blocking and striking at an invisible enemy. Han was so busy pretending he wasn't watching, he missed the R2 unit rolling up behind him until the thing knocked into him and whistled to get his attention. You finished scanning the hyperdrive? Everything look good? Han asked. The R2 unit whistled an affirmative and rolled past him before Han could ask about the sensor transceiver. The floor paneling rattled as the droid's wheels moved over it, taking the droid into the central hold. Han was about to turn back to lock up the circuit panel when he saw the fossil wave the droid over. Luke had a look of intense concentration on his face as he pivoted around and around in a circle, lifting his lightsaber.
I knew a guy who thought droids were evil and terrifying and had some ulterior motive.
His name was Atten. We like Atten. Most of the time. This way, that way, clearly lost in his own world. The R2 unit moved to Ben's side as if it were his faithful pet, an image that was further reinforced by the old man stroking a hand over its domed head. Can I just say, It's good to fly with you again, my old friend, the old man said, so softly Han wasn't sure he had heard him right. But it wasn't Han's business either way. He knelt down to pile his tools into their box and went back to his work. Ben, he heard Luke say, you alright? What's wrong? Han leaned back again, peering into the central hold area. The old man swayed on his feet, pressing a hand to his white hair. I felt a great disturbance in the Force. It was as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were
suddenly silenced, because I felt that same disturbance before. It was the Great Purge of 2012.
where a whole bunch of very beloved stuff was rendered non-canon. Wait, Sam, that didn't happen until 2014.
Oh, Great Purge of 2014. Sorry, I thought it was earlier. Anyway, that was the exact Great Purge I was thinking of.
I think it was like April specifically. Anyways, I fear something terrible has happened. Han gave up pretending not to be listening and made his way inside the cramped space. Well, he said, to lighten the mood, you can forget your troubles with those Imperial slugs. I told you I'd outrun them. The kid had his lightsaber in his hands and was squaring out with a fist-sized seeker droid Han used for target practice. It floated, and bobbed in the air.
Also, speaking of that disturbance in the Force, many years later, there will be the story of this Jedi who actually was eating his meal when something terrible happened, and he vomited up everything he ate because he felt a disturbance in the Force.
Disturbance is a massive understatement. The kid had his lightsaber in his hand and was squaring out the fist-sized seeker droid Han used for target practice. It floated and bobbed in the air. Past it, Chewie was locked in his own battle. He faced the little astromech droid across the Jajaric board and focused on the small holographic monsters on the table between them. He made his move. A monster clobbered one of the droids across the board. Don't everyone thank me at once, Han said dryly. Now be careful, R2, the prodigal droid began as Han took a seat. The R2 droid reached out a little claw hand and tapped his screen. One of his creatures moved to a new square. Chewie's temper flared and he began shouting in Wookie at the droid. He made a fair move, the golden droid said, and I honestly thought he would have wagged a finger at the Wookiee if he physically could. Screaming about it won't help you. Let him have it. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee. Han crossed his arms over his chest, brows raised. But, sir, the droid protested, no one worries about upsetting a droid. That's because droids don't pull people's arms out of their socket when they lose.
Okay, 1, Han Solo has seen that happen before. And 2, here's a new strategy for the droids. Let them win or they'll lightsaber Wookiee's arms off.
That's a reference to a regular webcomic. If you're into that kind of humor, please check it out. It's great. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee. Han crossed his arms over his chest, brows raised. But sir, the droid protested, no one worries about upsetting a droid. That's because droids don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. The prodigal droid's round eyes flashed. I see your point, sir. I suggest a new strategy, R2.
Well, if you have a Wookiee and a murder assassin droid playing hollow chess against each other, things could get real ugly real fast.
Fortunately, we don't have any murder assassin droids around. We have a murder astromech droid, though. Let the Wookiee win. The R2 unit whistled in protest, but Han had already turned his attention to where Luke was standing at the center of the hold lightsaber humming in his hands.
Also, you want to know how Chewbacca always wins? He cheats.
Yeah, he's infamous for that. Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him, Ben said. So it controls my actions? Luke asked, clearly confused. Partially, but it also obeys your commands. The Seeker droid floated to one side of Luke, then lunged to the other, as if taunting him. It flew back and made another fast-as-lightning move behind him. Han caught himself holding his breath as he watched. A bright laser bolt flew out of the Seeker droid, nailing Luke in the leg. The kid tumbled over with a squawk of alarm. Han laughed and laughed. Of course. Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good weapon at your side. Han, ancient weapons are still weapons. And the old man's method's just proven that all over again. Luke turned to Han. You don't believe in the Force, do you? Wasn't that obvious? I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything.
What about a black hole ripping a fabric through the fabric of universe through time and space? Have you seen that?
He has, and it was far from the strangest things he's seen. There's no mystical energy field that controls my destiny. Instead of glaring at Han or trying to start an argument Han was more than ready for, the old man merely smiled. It's just a lot of tricks and nonsense, Han insisted. The old man rose to his feet, smoothing his brown robes as he searched the hold for something. Ah, a helmet. I suggest you try it again, Luke, he said, placing the large white helmet on the kid's head. Its blast shield was down, effectively blinding him. I can't even see, Luke said, laughing. How am I supposed to fight? Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. Han rolled his eyes at the old man's words. This was going to be good. The remote shot straight up into the air.
This reminds me of a scene from Star Wars TV series where this young girl was being trained as a Jedi, and she said, "How am I supposed to see out of this thing?" Well, the training helmet did look like a Sith helmet used by a Sith Lord in the Old Republic era, but the point is, you're not supposed to see out of it.
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. Han rolled his eyes at the old man's words. This was going to be good. The remote shot straight up into the air, resetting. Luke swung the sword around so blindly Han almost jumped between the blue lightsaber and the tender walls of his ship. But the Seeker got there first, this time sending a bolt of hot laser right into Luke's behind.
This would also be much easier for Luke if he had some Jedi training droid that has trained and constructed lightsabers and trained Jedi for thousands and thousands of years.
I do wonder where Huyang was at this point. But the Seeker got there first, this time sending a bolt of hot laser right into Luke's behind. Han almost fell out of his chair laughing as the poor kid yelled.
Nice approach.
Stretch out with your feelings, Ben said, undaunted. Luke, you can do this. Trust your instincts. To Han's surprise, Luke squared his shoulders and stood in position again. And his hands were steady as they held the lightsaber. Even Chewie and the droids turned to watch. But no matter how many times the Seeker droid bopped around the kid, clearly trying to bait him into turning or dodging, Luke stayed still. Han was so focused on watching Luke that the sudden zap of energy from the droid startled him. But not Luke. The kid swung the sword around expertly, deflecting the red bolts. Han's eyes widened, and when he pulled off the helmet, Luke looked like even he couldn't believe it. You know, I'm curious about, there's a slight change here because the movie clearly deflects multiple bolts, so I guess the author thought that was a little unbelievable. Oh well.
I believe it.
As do I. Ben clapped his hands. You see? You can do it. I call it luck, Han muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. It was one thing to do it against a remote-controlled droid, and a whole other game to do it against the living. In my experience, there's no such thing as luck, Ben said as he rose swiftly onto his feet. How much longer until we reach the Alderaan system? Despite his obvious pleasure at the kids finally scoring one against the Seeker droid, Han could see the old man's face was still pale. Han could tell there was something stirring beneath the calm waters of his exterior. About 20 minutes, Han guessed. If you need to take a load off, there's a bunk in the back. Much appreciated. Ben said with a nod. Third door on your left, Han called after him, craning his neck to watch as the old man disappeared. Chewie was grumbling about some move the droid had made when Han learned to tuck at Luke. The kid was practicing some of the moves Ben had shown him earlier, clearly envisioning himself as the lone hero in some great battle. It occurred to Han that he didn't know the first thing about the kid. Other than that, he'd ticked off someone in the Imperial forces. Been there, Han thought. Many times. It irritated him, his curiosity about Luke, how he could still be so energetic about the idea of being part of some bigger force.
Ben there? Well, Ben's not here. He's in the bunk room that Han told him to go to.
Puns! So much of Han's own survival depended on evading questions that he'd lived under the philosophy of ask no questions, get no lies for years. He didn't ask people about themselves because he didn't want them to ask him questions. He couldn't or wouldn't answer. But just like that, Han found himself breaking his own rule. So, is he your grandfather or something? Luke's bright blue eyes flashed. Ben, he's a great man, you know. A Jedi Master, Han snorted. Or so the old man said. That's not what I asked. Oh, no, but...
Oh yeah, that reminds me of a incident report I got from a ship called the Ebon Hawk. Basically, a man in some creepy mask attacked them while he was on a ship that looked like it was a piece of junk. So this one Jedi lady and what looked like her grandma Jedi fled aboard the Ebon Hawk.
Wait a minute, Scion wasn't wearing a mask.
That was Nihilus.
But that didn't happen in KOTOR 2.
Actually, yeah, you're right. You're right. It was probably just some guy that looked like a zombie, looked like he hadn't slept with... Looks like he sleeps with swords at night. So then the Jedi and what looked like the Jedi's grandma escaped.
Okay, that's better. Thank you. Oh no, but he knew my father. They fought together in the Clone Wars. He's the one who gave me my father's old lightsaber. Luke held it up for Han to inspect. Nice. Han pushed against the feeling of anger balling in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't claim very many honorable qualities, but not trying to pull anything over on impressionable youth was one of them. He only took advantage of people who deserved it, thank you very much. Sweet, wholesome Han. But why couldn't dear old Dad give it to you himself? Luke's expression darkened, and Han suddenly felt like the biggest pile of Rancor poodoo. I think we... By the way, in case you're curious, no, poodoo does not mean what you think it is. It means food. The joke being that the kind of stuff you feed Rancors doesn't look or smell all that different when it comes out the other ends. Right. If Ben's story was true, it meant Luke's father had been a Jedi. And the Jedi were gone, hunted and killed as Emperor Palpatine rose to power. Both he and my mother died when I was a baby, Luke explained. I grew up on Tatooine with my Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. Wow, he really was fresh off the moisture farm.
I just thought of something really funny and completely unbelievable with Darth Nihilus. Let's just say, what comes in must come out. Basically, what he drains from planets comes out in some huge super laser.
That actually would be really cool.
Yeah.
This law of conservation of mass and all there. And they let you go off on this joyride? Chewie roared in victory, slamming his furry fist down on the game board. If Han had glanced away, he would have missed the flash of sharp, deep pain crossing Luke's face. No, they were... He struggled with the words. They were murdered by the Empire. Scratch that. As Luke told him everything that had happened back on Tatooine, Han felt like the biggest steaming pile of Rancor poodoo in the history of the galaxy. Jeez, kid, Han said when Luke had finished. He rubbed the back of his neck. Let me see if I got this straight. You and your uncle bought those two droids off Jawas, and it turns out that the short one is something stored on it the Empire wants? I guess they must have told Han about this off screen. Off page. Then he runs off, claiming he's owned by a Ben Kenobi. You chase him, barely survive a Sand People attack, and then willingly follow the fossil back to his home.
So, let me get this straight. In your galaxy, my dad is like super evil until he turns good for about 5 minutes and then dies. I become some huge legend. My nephew kills all of my friends that I care about, and I leave for some island surrounded by sadness, misery, and these flying things called porgs. And then I come back and use the Force so hard that it kills me?
Oh yeah, by the way, once again, if you already have Disney Plus, please watch Rebuild the Galaxy. It's great. But yeah, okay, let's see, where were we? Alright. Barely survive a Sand People attack and then willingly follow the fossil back to his home, which is a cave where he has lived alone for 20 years, with only his make-believe stories about Jedi to keep him company. By the way, cave. Obi-Wan's house it doesn't look anything like a cave. Luke.
Well, Han probably thought Obi-Wan's house was the cave that he used to live in before he bought the house, which was a long time ago, and Han is completely inaccurate about that. Also, those stories about make-believe Jedi actually include two Jedi legends, a woman named Kira Holt and a young Padawan named Zane Carrick.
Whoa. Sam, where are you getting that from?
The Obi-Wan Kenobi book.
Oh.
By John Jackson Miller.
I really need to reread that thing. Wait a minute.
It's only mentioned in one passage.
Wait a minute. John Jackson Miller also created Kira Holt and Zane Carrick. This is just being self-referential.
Probably is. He wanted to show off his designs in the Obi-Wan Kenobi book by having Obi-Wan write down a bunch of stuff and say, I knew this one Jedi named Kira Holt and this other one, this Padawan named Zane, was it?
Alright, well, once again, I do need to reread that. But that's not what you're here for. So let's get back to that. Luke nodded, clearly not getting what was wrong with that picture. Han stared at him, waiting. Apparently he was going to be waiting forever. You realize you put all your faith in a crazy person, right? Ben is not crazy. I meant what I said. I felt the Force earlier. He hasn't lied to me. He wouldn't. Oh, boy. Han patted Luke's shoulder as he stood. Stick with me, kid. I'll do you better than trying to tell you to some mystic energy. I'll teach you how to survive.
Yeah, well, the old Jedi woman who appeared with the Jedi Mitra Surik has actually been lying to her the whole time about who she was, what her motivations were. So, I'm just being a little cautious because I don't pretty much want that to happen again.
Okay, Sam. I know you love KOTOR too, and I know we're starved for things to reference, because this book is not exactly filled with references, but I feel like you're getting off topic even for us.
Okay, basically, what was I saying? Yeah, I forgot. Let's just move on.
Okay. I'll do you better than trying to tell you to some mystic energy. I'll teach you how to survive. They'd be so cute together. A faint alarm echoed over to them from the cockpit. Looks like we're coming up on Alderaan. Better go wake your friend up from his beauty sleep.
Those two Han and Luke, actually become best bros many years later.
Hey, spoilers! Han took the pilot seat again. Chewie jumped into the cockpit a moment later, taking the chair next to Han's. Alright, here we go, Han said. Stand by for hyperspace exit. He reached over to a lever on the console in front of him, pulling it back in a slow, smooth motion. The stars racing by in smears of white light suddenly solidified into points, and then the Falcon began to shudder, violently tossing back and forth. What the... Spread out in front of them was a field of small asteroids, all of which seemed to be racing straight toward the Falcon.
Well, now I remember the thing I was trying to reference. It wasn't KOTOR 2 at all. Actually, it was in the future. Luke will meet someone who seems honest, but then lies to him just to get him to join him.
That could refer to so many stories.
Talking about Jorus Sebaoth.
Let's not talk too much about that. Because I do actually want to cover the Thrawn trilogy someday.
We'll cover more about him in the Thrawn trilogy.
A long time from now. We have so much to cover. Han's heart slammed against his ribs as he seized the controls and yanked left, spinning the ship away from the hunk of space rocks flying straight for the cockpit. The ship dipped and twirled between the dark rods as nimble as any dancer, so fast that even he felt a little dizzy. A small piece of asteroid slammed into the ship's hull and ricocheted off, sending an even bigger asteroid hurtling toward them. Han tugged the controls back. The Falcon shot straight up before looping back down. The ship missed the big asteroid by mere meters. It was the hardest workout either he or the ship had gotten in some time. Han needs to get more exercise. He didn't breathe easily until they broke through the thick of it and were bouncing through just fragments and shards like bad turbulence. Chewie tossed out his theory in a growling snarl. Han nodded. Yeah, it must be some kind of meteor shower, an asteroid collision. It's not on any of the charts. Luke stumbled into the cockpit, barely catching himself on the door before he fell through it. What's going on? Han scratched his head, his face scrunching in thought as he double-checked the charts. Our position is correct, except no Alderaan. What do you mean? Where is it? Is it? Luke demanded, dropping into one of the seats behind them. Han glanced back just as Old Ben came in and sat down next to the boy. That's what I'm trying to tell you, kid. It's been totally blown away. What? Luke asked. How?
Let me guess. It moved. No, wait. Alderaan's not one of those planets that move. Yeah, something bad happened to Alderaan.
Okay, well, by move, I think you mean move out of its orbit. Technically speaking, all planets are moving all the time. In a way, everything's moving all the time because, atoms.
Yeah, Alderaan's one of those planets in orbit, but so can't have moved because those planets that move are out of orbit.
Plus, it moved and now there's an asteroid field in its place. Well, more an asteroid thicket, really. Yeah, I think we can all figure out what happens. Destroyed, Ben said, his quiet voice almost lost under the banging of rocky debris against the ship's hull. By the Empire. The old man had lost it. Okay, now I question what Han thinks is going on because, did he think Alderaan was blown away by a natural phenomenon?
Well, it is possible, but not even a natural phenomenon could create that.
Indeed. The entire Starfleet couldn't destroy the whole planet. It'd take 1,000 ships with more firepower than Han was interrupted by a whining beep, beep, beep from the console. There's another ship coming in. Maybe they'll know what happens, Luke offered, leaning forward for a better look. No, it's an Imperial fighter, Ben said. Look at the shape, the flat wings bookending the round cockpit. That's a TIE fighter. Chewie barked out a note of concern as the Imperial ship screeched over their heads. It followed us, Luke said. How was that possible? No, these are short-range fighters, Ben said. It couldn't have. There aren't any bases around here, at least not that I'm aware of, Han said, glancing back at Ben. You know something I don't? The TIE fighter raced toward what looked like a star in the near distance. If they identify us, we're in trouble, Luke said. Like Han wasn't already well aware of that concern. Not if I can help it, Han said. Chewie, jam its transmissions. It'd be as well to let it go, Ben said. It's too far out of range. Well, he won't be around long enough to tell anyone about us, Han said. Then pushing the Millennium Falcon until she began to rattle in protest. Let's get him in range to fire on. Another sign of Han's cold-bloodedness. We've no witnesses. Luke squinted, practically on top of Han now as he leaned toward the viewport window. I thought it was a star, but it looks almost like a moon.
Also, basically, I would be rich every time I heard someone say, leave no witnesses or kill them all. Basically, destroy them, no mercy, blah, blah, blah.
And now we've obligatory, if I had $1 every time I heard that joke. Luke's... But that couldn't be right either. Han swallowed in his seat, glancing at his navigation charts again. Alderaan had no moon, and it was just for a moment. But Han was sure his heart up and froze on him, because they were close enough now, closer than Han should have ever allowed them to get. He could see the surface of the silvery moon wasn't pockmarked with craters or mountains or even dried seabeds. It was metal. All of it metal. The skin of the thing was textured by towers, paneling, and the deep ravines along them. Han had flown to every corner of the galaxy, slipped through its grimy cracks, seen stars explode, and brushed up against death close enough to feel its icy breath. But for the first time in a long, long while, he was too stunned to speak. It was the old man who finally put words to Han's thoughts. That's no moon, Ben said. It's a space station.
So, yeah, I was going to say, that's no moon. Is it A, a space station, B, your mother, or C, a supermoon?
Nice.
The correct answer is A.
Chapter 10. I have a very bad feeling about this, Luke said slowly. He was still blinking as if he could erase the sights. Yeah, I think you're right, Han said. He turned to Chewie. Lock in the auxiliary power. Or the Millennium Falcon gave a sharp jerk, as if it had slammed into an invisible wall. Han gave the controls a tug, reaching up to try to adjust the power, but they were already flying at full speed. A prickle of panic ran down his spine before he could stamp it out. Why are we still moving toward it? Luke asked. We're caught in a tractor beam, Han said, struggling to control his outrage. There's nothing I can do. It's pulling us in. Right into the open hangar of the enormous battle station. They were taking his ship. The Imperials were actually taking the Falcon, and this time he had a feeling they weren't going to let him and Chewie off with a slap on the wrist. He swiveled in his seat, resentment steaming through him as he looked from a dumbstruck Luke to an unruffled Ben. They never should have taken this job. Forget the money, the Falcon was all Han had to his name. Unless he could think on his feet, he wouldn't even have that. They're not going to get me without a fight, he told the others, facing forward again. A hand settled lightly on his shoulder. You can't win, Ben said, but there are alternatives to fighting. Tell me, are there smuggling compartments on this ship? Han raised an eyebrow. Know many successful smugglers without them? Chewie barked out a nervous question as the ship was tugged toward the gaping mouth of the open hangar. No, I know what he's getting at. Han said, putting a steadying hand on his co-pilot's arm. As much as he hated to admit it, Tatooine's twin sons hadn't completely dried out the old man's brain. Go open the compartments and get everyone inside. I'll take care of things up here.
Oh yeah, in the Imperial Handbook, when Luke talks about Stormtroopers in his comments, Han Solo comments, it's not the heat on Tatooine that'll kill you, it's the boredom. Where's the anti-boredom trooper?
Nice. You might want to jettison escape pods, Ben said as Chewie stood and started to usher them out of the cockpit. Do you know how expensive those are to replace? Han asked, outraged. More or less valuable than your life, was the calm response. Han was still muttering about old men and their stupid questions when he turned back to the console and went to work writing up a quick notation in the captain's log. Abandoned ship upon entering the Alderaan system due to safety concerns. With a resigned sigh, he launched the empty escape pods. He resigned to the pop and hiss as their restraints released and sent them spiraling into space. His escape pods from his ship. The one he'd won in a perfect stroke of luck trying a game of cards.
In Solo: A Star Wars Story, which you should probably watch, Han Solo had no regrets after ejecting the frontal escape pod.
But hey, there are a lot of different versions of how he won the Falcon in a game of cards. All worth checking out. The one he spent years modifying and repairing. The one that had never let him down, not when encountered. Han wasted a few moments watching the battle station edge closer and closer. He powered down the ship and turned sharply on his heel. His boots clicking softly as he made his way back toward the others. His ship. The Millennium Falcon already had quite a record to her name in just smuggling charges. Han had never claimed to be the brightest star twinkling in the sky, but he could put two and two together. Being tied to the Empire's hunt for those droids would sink both him and his ship. If, no when, they got out of this, he would need to repaint her, alter her appearance, give her a new name. It was that, or buy a new ship. But that thought was like a laser blast to the chest. Almost. He couldn't give up on her. So many people had given up on Han. He couldn't do this to his ship. Yep. The smuggling compartments were hidden beneath the floor of one of the ship's narrow hallways. The latch to release one of them was virtually invisible if you didn't know where to look. Chewie had left one of the floor plates up for him. How close do you think we are? He heard Luke asked. Too close. Han crouched down, peering into the cramped space before sliding inside. The compartment was so shallow he had to crouch down to fit. Chewie must have been folded in half or curled on his side. When Han turned, he got a mouthful of Wookie hair. Well, smuggling himself on his own ship. This was definitely a first. One of them had thought to power off the droids at least, though the prodigal droid's foot was wedged into his back. Ouch, that was my knee, Luke cried. Chewie rumbled out a low apology. Excuse me. Quiet now, Ben said. We should be passing into the docking bay momentarily.
Good thing Han decided to power down the droids, because last time that happened, which was way back in the Clone Wars, a ship found another ship because the pilots of the ship forgot to power down the medical droid.
Yeah. Gotta keep an eye out for the scanners. We should be passing into the docking bay momentarily. Luke let out a small gasp of surprise as the ship dropped sharply once and then again. The second drop rattled them around like dice in a cup. A deafening screech of metal against metal made Han wince. The ship had all but belly flopped onto the hangar floor. He hadn't been able to deploy the landing gear without giving them away. Finally, someone must have gotten control of the cockpit remotely, because the ship rose on its landing gear. The ship's boarding ram creaked as it was lowered. To distract himself, Han started mentally adding up the astronomical cost of repairs. But once the troops flooded in, their boots pounding the floor and their voices buzzing out commands, they were impossible to ignore. Search this ship, every centimeter of it. The escape pods have been deployed, sir. The captain's log indicates the abandoned ship. The sickening thought of Imperial filth tracking their dirt into a ship faded as realization set in. Han, you do realize there's no dirt on a space station, right? I know what the author was going for. I know I'm getting too nitpicky. The Stormtroopers must have passed right over them a dozen times, and never once did they seem to stop or slow. They were going to get away with it. All that was left to do was wait. Sorry. Chapter 11. Han kept his back flat against the wall next to the ship's open hatch, risking another glance down the ramp. The cool, fresh oxygen made him feel alert. The compartment had grown so warm Han had felt smothered by the damp air. He glanced over to where Chewie stood on the other side of the door, giving him a small signal. His co-pilot pulled back, ducking farther into the ship. Han was about to follow when his attention was drawn back to the two stormtroopers stationed at the bottom of the boarding ramp. "The ship's all yours," one of the stormtroopers called. A moment later, a small group of men from the hangar crew aboard appeared. They pushed a large, dark blue rectangular card forward. Han recognized it immediately. A scanner. So, those white helmets weren't empty after all. They would scan every centimeter of the ship looking for hidden compartments. If the scanners pick up anything, report it immediately, the stormtrooper said. Han fell back, moving quickly to where Chewie was waiting around the nearest corner. Luke and Ben hovered a short distance behind him. The kid was the very picture of nerves. Han gave him a reassuring look before setting his blaster to stun. Stun. Very generous, Han. Han tracked the sound of the scanner crew as they entered the Falcon and set to turning on the machine. The three men spoke diligently to each other as they started their work, rolling the scanner forward, right into the waiting Wookie. The crew had 1 second to look terrified before Chewie knocked two out with his fist, and Han stunned the third into a deep sleep. Of those two didn't get brain damage. Han cupped his hands around his mouth and called, "Hey down there! Can you give us a hand with this?" He had to give them a little credit. Both stormtroopers were quick reaching for their guns, but very few in the galaxy were faster on the draw than Han. The two stormtroopers felt just as hard as the scanner crew did. And this time it wasn't set to stun. "Nice shooting," Luke said, clapping Han on the shoulder. "Thanks, kid. Now which one do you want?" Han gestured to the two stormtroopers. "Quickly, quickly," Ben said, keeping an eye on the boarding ramp as Luke and Han stripped the stormtroopers of their uniforms. "Oh my," the prodigal droid C-3PO, as Luke called him, sounded startled at being rebooted. The R2 unit rolled around them, investigating what they were doing. "Phew," Han said, holding out the black fabric jumpsuit. "You think these guys ever heard of bathing? Mine smells like the guy slept in it." Luke took a sniff of his, then groans. "I think they must have served something spicy for lunch today." Han threw the stiff white armor on, adjusting the various straps. The helmet smelled like bad breath.
Well, that's the thing about stormtroopers, their armor and their helmets. You walk in them, you eat in them, you sleep in them, you maybe even bathe in them.
Which is really impractical. Han threw the stiff white armor on, adjusting the various straps. The helmet smelled like bad breath. "Lead on, old man. This is your plan." Ben's dark brown robe swept out behind him as he made his way down the ramp. Han glanced over his shoulder, telling Luke, "We need to keep the droids between us. We need to keep the droids behind us." Something clattered in the distance, and a faint womp, womp, womp alarm sounded. Han ran down the steps just in time to see the remaining stormtroopers and hangar crew rushing toward the exit. Ben stood in the shadows of the Falcon, his hood up. "What did you do?" Han asked. "Tricks and nonsense," Ben said with a small smile. A security alarm required their attention. "Telekinesis, very versatile." Han was still staring at Ben when Luke and Chewie followed the old man out. Let's go, Luke said, nodding toward the glass observation window 2 stories above them. The small command center would give them access to the battle station's tactical details. Ben was right, they might be able to disable the tractor beam from there. They had no problems entering the elevator unseen, riding it up to the 3rd level in silence. The door slid open and Han stepped out first, narrowly avoiding the troop of officers marching by. Ben said quietly, "I believe it's that door over there." "All right, let's get this over with." Han led the way, getting into position just outside the door. Luke and Chewie to his right. Before he could buzz to be let in, the door snapped open. The Imperial officer standing there jumped back in alarm just as Chewie let out a magnificent roar. Han fired on the other officer manning the switchboards and controls, taking him out as the rest of the group flooded into the room behind him. "You know," Luke said as he ripped off his helmets.
I just thought of this. Since the hangar incident, have we ever had any contact with TK-421?
Unfortunately, no. Between his howling and your blasting everything in sight, it's a wonder the whole station doesn't know we're here. "Bring them on," Han shot back, taking off his own helmet. "I prefer a straight fight to all of this sneaking around."
Don't say things like that, Han. You're gonna jinx it.
You know what they say, be careful what you wish for. Luke was still shaking his head when he turned to Ben. "You alright? You look like you've seen a ghost." The old man had turned back toward the door they'd come through, his head cocked slightly to the side as if he were listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. "I sense a presence I've not felt in some time." "We found the computer outlet, sir," 3PO said. "He says he found the main computer to power the tractor beam that's holding the ship. He'll try to make the precise location appear on the monitor." I hadn't even seen the little R2 unit stick its little probe arm. It's called a scomp, by the way. Into one of the sockets of the console. While he and Luke went to watch the monitor, Han actually using his head, turned and secured the locks on the doors. "The tractor beam is coupled to the main reactor in 7 locations," 3PO explained, ignoring the whistles from the R2 units. "A power loss at one of these terminals will allow the ship to leave." Van studied the map on the screen. "I don't think you boys can help with this. I must go alone." "Great, fantastic." Han held up his hands. "Whatever you say, you aren't paying me nearly enough for this." Luke ignored Han, grabbing Ben's arm. There was a look of panic on the kid's face. "I want to go with you." The old man, though, was as calm as ever. "Be patient, Luke. Stay and watch over the droids. They must be delivered safely, or other star systems will suffer the same fate as Alderaan. Your destiny lies along a different path than mine." And here are the droids in question. Han rolled his eyes so hard at Ben's dramatic tone they should have gone flying out of his head. "The Force will be with you. Always," Ben said. He pulled his hood up over his head, then felt for the lightsaber at his side. When the door opened, he ducked out into the long gray hall. Luke stood there a moment, watching him go before shutting the door. Han leaned over the console, checking on the Falcon below. The R2 droid started whistling like crazy, its head spinning back toward Luke. "What is it?" Luke asked. "Wait, slow down, R2. Sir, I'm afraid I'm not entirely sure. He says I found her and keeps repeating, 'She's here, she's here.'" "Who?" Luke asked before Han could. "Why, Princess Leia, sir." "The princess?" Luke cried. "She's here?" Han blinked. "Princess? What's going on?" "Indeed," 3PO said, interpreting R2's beeping for them. "Level 5, detention block AA-23. I'm afraid she's scheduled to be terminated." Han could have groaned. If anything was going to light an unwanted fire under Luke, a damsel in distress was. Still, the name sounded familiar. Princess Leia. Leia, where had he heard that before? "We've got to do something," Luke said. "What are you even talking about?" Han asked. "The droid, R2, he belongs to her. She recorded a message for Ben to find, saying she needed his help delivering something stored on the droid to her father on Alderaan." Yikes, unless her father had left the planet before it was destroyed. He did not. No one was delivering anything to anyone. "Now look," Han began, "don't get any funny ideas. The old man wants us to wait right here." It was like he hadn't spoken at all. Luke ignored him and turned back to the droids. "Can you find a way into the detention block?" "I'm not going anywhere," Han said. He'd hang around long enough for the old man to disable the tractor beam, and then he was gone, with or without the kid. No, that wasn't true. He wouldn't leave without the kid. Luke would get himself killed. An unwanted fear gripped Han's stomach, turning it over. Okay, at this point I think we can practically start a drinking game regarding cute Han and Luke moments. They're going to execute her, Luke said. Look, a few minutes ago you said you didn't want to just wait here to be captured. Now all you want to do is stay. Nice tactic, turning Han's words against him. Smooth, kid.
If the Empire wants to make the execution hurt, then execution by blaster won't really do.
Personally, I've always felt torturing people to death is rather inefficient, but bad guys got a villain. Smooth, kid. Marching into the detention area is not what I had in mind. They'll execute us too if we're caught. Something lit behind Luke's eyes, and when he looked at Han again, there was a small knowing smile on his face. She's rich. Chewbacca swiveled toward the kid, suddenly interested, growled. Even Wookiees have their price, it seems. Rich, Han repeated slowly.
I just thought of this. Perfect way for Imperials to execute someone. Bring in the Stormtroopers with black hood helmets and laser axes.
Those don't exist yet.
Well then, the First Order must be ahead of it. Well then, the First Order must have done something new besides copy the Empire.
They did a few things new. Rich, Han repeated slowly. How much are we talking? Listen, Luke began. If you were to rescue her, the reward would be... Han caught himself leaning forward. What? Well, more wealth than you can imagine, Luke finished. I don't know. I can imagine quite a bit. Enough to swim through, roll around in, and maybe buy himself his own personal islands on a planet where Jabba could never find him. Insert Scrooge McDuck and or Flynn Rider reference here. And you'll get it. All of it. Han leaned back against the console, crossing his arms over his chest as he considered that. Any amount he could dream up, huh? A reward of that magnitude would get Jabba off his back and set him up for what exactly? Going legal with his business? Buying some property and settling down? Chewie had a family to support, but what would Han even do with the money other than put it back into the Falcon or buy a new ship? I feel like Han's missing the obvious. Leia's wealth probably blew up with Alderaan problem. The kid could dream all he wanted about being a big shot hero rescuing princesses, but Han was just a normal droid trying to keep his skin, and if he could, rescue the dreamers from their delusions. Casting a worried look at Luke.
Yeah, well, I have to say this about Han. When he does get the riches, he might either spend them all and be on the run again, or waste them all on something stupid. We'll get to the something stupid part much later.
Han tried to imagine a scenario where the kid would be able to make it out of the battle station without his help. Luke might have had the heart, but there were times he had to be heartless to survive. But if Han were being honest, he would admit that it stung just a little bit that the kid assumed everything he did was for money. I'd better, he told Luke. All of it. Han looked at Chewie, waiting for his grunt of agreement. When he had it, he asked, "What's your plan?" Luke glanced around, eyes catching on something on the console. 3PO, can you hand me those binders? Holding the binders, he took a step closer to Chewie. Okay, now I'm going to put these on you. Chewie liked that idea about as much as he liked getting haircuts. He uttered a furious roar, pride ruffled. Okay. Han, you put them on. Luke quickly shipped of the binders into Han's hands. Don't worry, Chewie. I think I know what he has in mind. Easy, buddy. You know it's just pretend, Han assured him. Yeah, Chewie's got a bad history with chains. Still, his heart gave a little jerk over how worried Chewie looked as Han snapped the electronic binders in place. Master Luke, sir, 3PO said. Pardon me for asking, but what should R2 and I do if we're discovered here? Luke picked up his Stormtrooper helmet again. Lock the door, and hope they don't have blasters, Han added. They probably will. Just saying. You know.
Well, yeah, they could. Yeah, they'll definitely have blasters, but if they're lucky, some stormtroopers might not be able to enter the door.
Yeah, they are also very incompetent. Chapter 12. The moment the elevator door slid open on the detention block, Han knew they were in trouble. This isn't going to work, he muttered. Why didn't you say so before? Luke hissed back. I did say so before. At least 5...
I just thought of this. From what I said, I just thought of this. Stormtroopers bang on the door. Hello? Hello? Anyone in there? Let us in. Then Stormtrooper goes talks to the rest of his squad. Does any of you know how to open a door?
Of course. At least 5 times since they had left the control room. It wasn't Han's fault. Luke heard only what he wanted to hear. The detention block was everything Han didn't want it to be. Well protected by laser gates and cameras and well manned by a half dozen security officers. I did not see any laser gates in the movie.
I think that was something that was cut from the movie. Completely. No deleted scenes or anything.
Yeah, it sounds like the kind of thing you'd see in a video game more than anything. One of those officers looked up from the processing station as Han, Luke, and Chewie approached. By the way, in case you're curious, this guy's name is Shan Childson. That's not important or anything, I just thought it was funny. His lip peeled back in disgust as he looked the Wookiee over. Where are you taking this thing? Han held his breath, fighting to keep his temper in check. Prisoner transfer from block 1138. Alright, pay attention to the number to the numbers 1138. They're going to show up a lot. Luke said. Han was proud of how smoothly the live rolled off the kid's tongue. Maybe Han was rubbing off on him after all. I wasn't notified. The security officer's eyes narrowed. I'll have to clear it. Blast. Han cast another nervous look around, sizzling up the room as the officer walked back to the console. They were 2 seconds away from having a hole shot right through their story.
A good quote for this whole scene would be when Han mentions new orders, the security officer would say, I didn't hear any new orders, and a stormtrooper next to him would say, I didn't see any new orders. Then the security officer would say again, are you sure you're in the right place?
Indeed. As Luke stepped forward, Han subtly reached over and unfastened one of Chewie's binders with a shrug. Chewbacca wasted no time. He threw his arms up with a roar that frightened even Han. The Wookiee yanked the blaster free from Han's hands and began to fire. Look out! Han shouted. He's loose! He's going to pull us apart! Luke cried, overdoing it just a bit. Security officers gaped at them, confused. It was the opening Han and Luke needed to pull out their own blasters. Luke quickly caught on that while Han was aiming in Chewie's general direction, all his shots were going wide, hitting cameras, the laser gate controls, and finally the guards themselves. A silence fell over the detention block as the last of the security officers slumped forward. Han's ears were ringing too loudly for him to hear the faint alarm chirping from the processing station. When he did, his pulse kicked up a notch. He pulled off his helmet and rushed over to the console, scanning through the list of prisoners. Here it is. Your prisoner is in cell 2187. Evan, I'll go get her. I'll hold them off. That's also a number that'll be important later. Luke nodded, then scampered up the stairs to the long, dark row of cells. Han took a deep breath and cleared his throat, his finger poised above the comlink. One of them must have grazed it with a shot because it was still sparking and smoking as he pushed the button to establish a connection. Everything is under control, he said in his best official, yes, I belong here voice. Situation normal. What happens? A voice crackled through the still smoking intercom. Han jumped as a spark shot out of it. We had a slight weapons malfunction. His voice sounded painfully awkward to his own ears, so he could only imagine what the person on the other end was thinking. But, everything's perfectly alright now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you? He cringed. We're sending a squad up, came the immediate response. Negative. We have a reactor leak here now. Give us a few minutes to lock it down. Large leak, very, dangerous. In case you're curious, why is he claiming there's a reactor in the detention block? Harrison Ford improvised this scene. That's why. Who is this? What's your operating number? Oh, well. Han leaned back, blasting out the comlink entirely.
Yeah. Definitely they should listen to Han because, bad news, the Death Star doesn't have any Imperial radiation troopers. Also mentioned in the Imperial Handbook.
It's a very good handbook. Oh well, Han leaned back, blasting out the comlink entirely. Boring conversation anyway. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down the hall. Luke, we're going to have company. Chewie hauled a question to him from where he stood by the door, blaster at the ready. I just jammed the doors, Han told him. They won't be able to get in. There was a low, terrifying buzz from the other side of the thick metal doors. Well, that didn't take them long. Get behind me, Han shouted. The Wookiee scampered away, falling back closer to the cells. The rattle of explosions on the other side of the door shook Han down to his bones. He knew the moment they had broken through. The wave of heat that came off the door singed his skin. Then the stormtroopers began to pour through the opening they made. Han coughed against the smoke and fiery air as he and Chewie turned and ran up the hallway of cells. Okay, do you think this is a good stopping point?
Yeah, it is now.
Okay, well, we'll see you probably not tomorrow, but definitely one of the other days this week, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching. Bye.